To the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblett, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Monday, the 7th of July, 2025. Good to have you on board as always. In previews of coming attractions, the Naval Institute will host the second of 4 panel discussions on shipbuilding that we're hosting this year. The next one will be on 14 August at 1500 here at the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center in Annapolis. This one is going to be titled Correcting Course, Accelerating Unmanned by Bridging Requirements, Acquisition, and Fleet Integration. It's going to focus on the unmanned side of shipbuilding with reps from the Navy and industry. Should be a great conversation, as all of these will be. Today's episode is brought to you by Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. All right, my guests today are Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonels, 2 of them, Brian Kerg and Bobby Fowler. They are 2 of the 3 authors of an article in the July issue of Proceedings. It's titled, "The MLR Does Not Equal the Stand-in Force." You can find it in the July issue. It starts on pages 62 and 63, and it's a great article. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. Pleasure to be back.
All right, I'm gonna start before we get into the issue of the article and all the stuff that it brings up. Just tell our audience a little bit about yourselves. So I'll start with Brian. What's your MOS? What's your current job? Where are you stationed? And you know, kind of what's going on for you, and then we'll follow that with Bobby.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill. Pleasure to be back as always, and it's a real honor to be here today with Bobby and one of our co-authors who could not be here, Major Anthony Johnson. He's here in spirit for sure, though. So myself, prior enlisted mortarman, commissioned and became a communications officer by primary MOS. Across numerous other billets and additional MOSs, picked up the operational planner gig, which helped inform a lot of some of the thought from our shared experiences in this article. And I'm currently serving as the commanding officer of Marine Wing Communications Squadron 38, Red Lightning.
And you're based in Miramar, California, right?
And beautiful Marine Corps Air Station, Miramar. No complaints here.
Nice place to be. All right, Bobby, tell our audience a little bit about you.
Hey, Bill, thank you again for having us on today. Greatly appreciate the opportunity. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Bobby Fowler, currently serving as the Provost Marshal aboard Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton as part of Marine Corps Installations West. Much like Brian, I'm also a former operational planner. He and I served together in 3 MEF, and I've got pretty extensive experience with the MLR and with the problem sets that we face in the Pacific as a result of those past experiences.
All right, great. All right, let's get to the article. So first question to you, Brian. So the article set out to dispel some misinformation. It starts by saying, if you ask mid-grade Marine leaders, what is the stand-in force, many will answer incorrectly or at least incompletely, the Marine Littoral Regiment, or MLR. So let's start with some definitions first. So what's the stand-in force?
So at the risk of immediately losing the audience, I'm going to draw from a military conceptual document and all the jargon thereunto pertaining. So buckle up. To quote directly from the source, the document titled A Concept for Stand-in Forces, which was published in 2021, stand-in forces are defined as, quote, small but lethal, low signature, mobile, relatively simple to maintain and sustain forces designed to operate across the competition continuum within a contested area as the leading edge of a maritime defense in depth in order to intentionally disrupt the plans of a potential or actual adversary. End quote. So that was a mouthful, right? There's a lot of descriptors in there, but you'll note that the definition was service agnostic and formation agnostic. It was descriptive, but not prescriptive. And so for this conversation, it's important to note that stand-in forces, or SIF, they are not just inclusive of Marine Corps forces, let alone just of the MLR, but also includes any force that meets that definition. So it's not uncommon to hear planners and other folks that work in the space, they may colloquially refer to SIF as being inclusive of Marines, subs, and SOF, or Special Operations Forces. And we're just confusing ourselves more with SIF and SOF, right? But even that catchphrase, it doesn't capture them all. And that'll be a point that we can probably discuss in more detail later on. If I could, I'll high five Bobby in case he has more to add on that point.
Okay.
Brian, that was a pretty succinct and good definition. Good job pulling it from the textbook, as always. One thing I would also highlight, Bill, just for the viewers and listeners, is the fact that, when we say stand-in forces, oftentimes what folks think is, static, stationary forces, hunkered down, kind of dug in one place. And really, that's not what stand-in forces is at all. They are able to still maneuver, they're still mobile, and they have to be that way in order to persist and survive in what we anticipate to be the future battlefield.
Okay, that's great. So now let's talk about the MLR, the Marine Littoral Regiment, which is a fairly new organization within the Marine Corps, and it's getting a lot of articles in our magazine, but also others. So, Bobby, over to you. Just what is an MLR?
So really, when we talk about the MLR, the Marine Littoral Regiment has its roots in our force design efforts that began back in 2019. If you recall, Bill, General David Berger, our former commandant, had a very significant push to revolutionize the way in which we fight and the way in which we are organized. And the Marine Littoral Regiment was a key foundational part of that. It is an 06-led regiment with 3 subordinate battalions. One battalion is a littoral combat team. One is a littoral anti-air battalion, and another is a littoral logistics battalion. And really, it's supposed to be a multifaceted organization. It has a host of things that it can do, but a few things that it really stick out in my mind that it does is, one, it contributes to sea denial by providing maritime domain awareness through sensors. Additionally, it provides long-range fires and contributes to the joint force efforts in a distributed environment. Anything else to add, Brian?
Yeah, you crush it, Bobby. So one thing I'd highlight is some of the other things that you can do with this, right? So we discussed, sea denial, sea control. Really, that's the formation's bringing some long-range precision fires to engage, say, as an example, enemy ships, as well as some anti-air defense systems to protect friendly forces from enemy strike capabilities. And as you noted, Bobby, these are essential elements of the SIF concept. They'll allow naval expeditionary forces to operate and survive within the operational reach of enemy's fires. They can hold enemy forces at risk, and they can create opportunity for the rest of the joint force, right? Those standoff forces that will eventually fight their way into the enemy's threat range where the stand-in forces already are. And a good way to cap this off is to I'll take, again, going right to the source. And for this source, I'll read verbatim the mission of one of the MLR's, 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment, as stated right now on its website. Quote, "The Marine Littoral Regiment, as part of the stand-in force, disrupts the adversary in a contested littoral environment through reconnaissance, counter-reconnaissance, and sea denial operations in order to support the maritime campaign." End quote, and I'll stop it right there.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question that just popped into my head here. So MLR versus Marine Expeditionary Unit, they are different things, or can parts of an MLR be part of a MU, of a Marine Expeditionary Unit? For our non-Marine listeners here and our non-amphibious Navy listeners, I think this is just an important distinction and question for you guys.
Yeah, I'll lead off here. So yeah, a lot of confusion because the word marine and the word littoral sound pretty synonymous. In a sense, it's like Marine Regiment. Is that what we're talking here? But a Marine Littoral Regiment and a Marine Expeditionary Unit are 2 separate and distinct formations. The MLR was an infantry regiment that has been transformed for these littoral capabilities we're describing today. The Marine Expeditionary Unit remains that 06 level MAGTAF with the battalion landing team, a combat logistics battalion, and then reinforced ACE to do the host of missions embarked upon an amphibious ready group that the MU is known for. Bobby, anything further on that point?
No, Brian, I think you hit the nail on the head. I would offer that there are elements of certain capabilities that are resident within the Marine Expeditionary Unit that you also find replicated in the MLR. But again, Brian hit the nail on the head. Distinct, separate organizations with entirely different missions. Okay,
and we know that a MU is generally based on an amphibious ready group. So you have an ARG-MU combination or a MU-ARG combination, right? So you've got, an LHD, LHA, plus a couple of smaller amphibs with this Marine colonel-led Marine Expeditionary Unit. I think anyone who's been in the Navy for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right, is very familiar with an ARG-MU, or call it an amphibious strike group, right? Whereas an MLR, as you said MAGTAF when you were talking about Expeditionary Unit, about a MU, but an MLR is not a MAGTAF, not an organic Marine Air Ground Task Force, right?
That's correct. And so while the MU would be resident and embarked upon an ARG and its primary deployment construct and would have organic air assets that would allow it to move forces, say, from ship to shore or otherwise maneuver around a battle space. The MLR, it doesn't have organic air assault, say, lift. And we go down a whole other rabbit hole of some of the discussions surrounding ship acquisition and the struggles to procure the landing ship medium or the bridging solution of the stern landing vessel, and all the other things that are preventing, or rather creating friction in terms of the MLR having a maneuver solution. But even then, again, that would not be organic to the MLR. For the MLR to move, it's going to, should the LSM be procured or another solution, that's a Navy asset. And should it need to move around via air, then it's going to have to reach laterally, or up through division to MEF, back down to the Marine Aircraft Wing to pull the air assault assets to move it about the battle space. I may have bloviated on a bit too long, but Bobby, anything further on that point?
No, I think you nailed it exactly, Brian.
All right. So, Bobby, this question for you. Are there other joint forces that should be considered or are considered stand-in forces? I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I just want to be clear that it's not just Marines that are stand-in forces, correct?
Absolutely. In fact, I think when we think about stand-in forces, a potential China conflict is the best way to frame that. And so you have to imagine that if we were to pursue a conflict with China, all the forces that we have in the Western Pacific, west of the international date line, are going to be largely isolated if that conflict begins. And so by nature, all the forces across the joint force, all those different formations and capabilities that are resonant to that region when that kicks off, are going to become, by default, stand-in forces. So yes, things like the MDTF, or the Multi-Domain Task Force from the U.S. Army, the 18th Air Wing, that's a Kadena Air Base, all the elements of USARPAC and SOCPAC forces that we have forward at any given time, whether they're permanently based or they're on an episodic or rotational basis, those are all stand-in forces, not just a Marine Corps thing.
Gotcha. And I think Brian mentioned Special Operations Forces, so SOF is a big part of this, and also submarines. So Navy submarines at the beginning of a conflict especially may be some of the most valuable, most useful assets that can operate inside that enemy weapons engagement zone. So I think that's really important for our listeners to take away, is that when they hear stand-in forces, and you guys have both said this, your article says it, it's not just Marines, it's not just a particular type of Marine or Marine unit, that there's lots of different types of stand-in forces across the joint force. And as you pointed out, Bobby, there's the Navy's got stand-in forces, Air Force has got some stand-in forces, Marines, of course, obviously, Army as well. So really, really important to know that this term SIF is a joint term. It's not just a Marine Corps term. Let's talk about command and control, because this comes up in the article, and I found it to be one of the most interesting parts of the article, which is that for the Marine Littoral Regiment and some of those capabilities that it brings, and particularly I think here we're talking about the anti-ship missiles, the naval strike missiles that are going to be part of the Nemesis system that an MLR can bring to the fight and put ashore on an atoll, for example, or within an archipelago, and move them around and be part of the anti-ship capability of the joint force. Like how are those going to be commanded and controlled? Who will own the decision, not just own the asset, but also own the decision, the engagement decision matrix that determines what the target is, and then who's going to engage that target. So maybe we start with Bobby on this one.
All right, I'll take a swing at it, and then I'll hand it over to Brian, because I know he's got some pretty strong thoughts on this. I'm going to give kind of a vanilla answer up front, Bill. I would say that it kind of depends, right? I don't know if there's going to be a one size fits all or kind of a cookie cutter C2 approach that we can apply to the MLR across a range of conflicts. I think it's going to have to depend on the nature of the conflict that they find themselves in, the geography in which they find themselves fighting in. And lastly, I think the different formations and headquarters that will be resident there, whether that's a JTF, a MEF headquarters, or even a fleet headquarters. I think what is imperative going forward, and the MLR is already doing this and has been for the past few years, is experimenting with different C2 models, whether, that's the fleet in charge, the Marines in charge, perhaps even a JIFLIC in charge of MLR capabilities. But we have to continue to experiment and refine that through wargaming, exercises, and other mission rehearsals. And again, the MLR has been doing that for some time. They've experimented with a wide variety of different C2 constructs. That way, when the time comes that we will have to call upon them to be integrated into the joint force, we'll have some options that we've tested out beforehand to see what works best. Brian, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, so I'll just open by saying Bobby's answer is the right answer. It depends, and it always does. What I'd offer is that the dependency must be informed by the doctrine around which many of these joint formations are in fact constructed, and how we train to fight at that echelon, right? So as an example, and once again, at the risk of putting listeners to sleep, because maybe they don't want a lesson on componency and how joint force headquarters might be constructed, but it's actually critical to the point, so I'm not going to apologize for it. So a joint task force, it'll have joint components, right, that command the forces aligned either with the services or the functions and domains in which those forces contribute. And so for our purposes here, we'll just stick with functional components like the Joint Force Land Component Commander, the JIFLIC, the Joint Force Maritime Component Commander, the JIFMIC, and the Joint Force Air Component Commander, the JFAC. And which service heads up each? Again, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on a host of operational factors. But in a maritime or a littoral environment in which the MLRs would fight, say the first island chain, and for a contingency involving the pacing threat for which the MLRs were designed, that is the People's Liberation Army, the U.S. Navy is almost certainly going to own the role of the JIFMIC, and the Air Force will almost certainly own the role of the JFAC. As much as I, as a Marine, want to believe that we've won every war on our own and that we will win every war on our own, that's just the propaganda talking. And I know that we do not fight alone. We'll fight as a joint force always. So that means that the series of coordination mechanisms, control measures that dictate how you fight with joint capabilities are going to be dictated by the component. So let's get to brass tacks. If you're going to fire munitions into the water at an enemy surface combatant, then the JIFMIC is going to own how that process works. And they could delegate that down to certain levels in other headquarters, but they ultimately are going to be the ones that are going to call the shots on target engagement authority, probably using the Navy's combined warfighting construct, probably belonging to the surface warfare commander, and perhaps operating out of a MOC in some form or fashion. And that's a long way of saying a Navy commander is going to make the call on who shoots what, where, and when, even if the fire system is resident within the Marine Littoral Regiment, if you're shooting at something that floats. And similarly, if you're contributing to air defense, there's another C2 chain or authorities chain that we could draw out that goes up through the JFAC to the Area Air Defense Commander. I won't go into all the details. The article kind of speaks to that a bit more, but there's another chain that you have to be cognizant of if you're shooting something into the air and seeing who's going to control the magazines, preventing target saturation, deconfliction of fire so that there's no fratricide and other things. So the key takeaway is that the things that are resident within the MLR that actually kill big enemy targets, they're going to fall under joint authorities and be controlled by joint agencies. And again, it can be delegated. There's different flavors that they could come out of, but ultimately it's going to start there, and they're going to own it, right? And that actually ties right into the Marine Corps' value proposition of the stand-in force being the, quote, JTAC of the joint force, which means the joint force has their hands on the wheel. Over.
The JTAC of the joint force, so the Joint Tactical Area Controller, right? So in OEF and OIF examples, right, you had a guy or gal, somebody on the ground forward with eyes on target, calling in the weapons, in many cases JDAMs that were coming off of Air Force, Navy, Army aircraft onto enemy emplacements, right? So yeah, it's an interesting point. I want to pull at the thread a little bit more, because what we're really saying here is under as you pointed out, we fight as a joint force, right? And so you may have, perhaps a Marine Littoral Regiment puts a Nemesis battery with those naval strike missiles on an island somewhere inside the first island chain. And it's not going to be, the young Marine captain out there, as much as he or she may want to, pull the trigger and fire one of those Nemesis missiles at a PLA Navy ship in a wartime environment, right? They're not making that decision themselves. That decision to engage an enemy surface combatant, whether it's being done by an Air Force B-1 bomber dropping a long-range air-to-surface missile, or whether it's that Nemesis, battery out there on the island it's owned by the Marines, or whether it's a Navy surface ship firing a naval strike missile. That decision is going to be made by the JIFMC, the Joint Force Maritime Component Commander that owns the water space, right? So it's interesting. All these different joint forces are providing the weapons, but then the command and control to engage that Navy asset or that surface adversary asset is made by, in this case, the JIFMC, or if it's taking out an air asset, it's made by the JFAC, I guess is a point that you're making. Did I get that right? It's been a few years since I retired from active duty, so just want to make sure that.
Yeah, Bill, that's a good readback. And what's funny is if you turn back the clock to when all these source documents first dropped, when the 2019 National Defense Strategy said, hey, Marine Corps, focus on China, and then the Commandant rolled out with the 38th Commandant's planning guidance, and the first Force Design 2030 document and MLRs were first a thing, or rather naval integration and sea denial and sea control as a Marine Corps mission became a focus of effort. What you just described about the dilemmas, like, is Captain Kerr going to take the shot, or is Corporal Kerr going to take the shot? We chewed on those things, and that required a significant escalation in terms of our own education on joint processes, and exposed, frankly, I can speak for myself, a lot of ignorance. And I think other listeners who've worked in the space will probably reflect on their own learning curve as they face that as well. But one thing I will say is, this is not to say that the MLR is something that's going to be C2'd by that joint agency. The MLR commander, for example, he or she still owns the risk as far as the force protection of the forces, where they're going to be, how they're going to move around, the sustainment obligation, all those, the cover, the how to stay concealed, etc. All the other things that are inherent to command will still be the responsible of that formation, and ad echelon down to the battalions, down to the companies or the batteries, down to the fire team. But when it comes to, yes, the potentially operational decision, or if it's the first shot, the strategic decision to sink an enemy ship, to take an enemy aircraft out of the sky, or you name it, that's going to go up those other C2 lines that you read back to me. Bobby, any following thoughts on that point?
Not much, Brian. The one thing I would add is that, again, this is something that the MLR has been experimenting with for some time. So you see this same conversation bubble up in every exercise and war game about who is going to have what C2 authorities. And it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years, especially as we have another MLR, 12th MLR, come online to see where that conversation goes as we continue to integrate with the joint force.
So as it stands right now, there's just one MLR?
There's third MLR that's stationed in Hawaii, and then the 12th MLR that's standing up in Okinawa.
Over in Okinawa. Okay, so the focus now for these MLRs as they get established is obviously Indo-Pacific. Will there be MLRs on the 2MEF side of the world?
Time now will say that there are no plans for that, and there's lots of other whys that we could speculate, but I'll say officially, right now, the only MLRs that are stood up or standing up are 3rd and 12th. There's discussion, and this is confusing. When I say 3rd MLR, I mean the number is 3rd MLR that identifies that unit. 12th MLR is the 2nd MLR that is stood up, and there has been discussion about 4th Marines becoming a 4th MLR. Bobby, any clarification on that? Did I get anything off base?
No, that's perfect. And the discussion about 4th MLR is still ongoing, trying to figure out whether or not we actually need a 3rd MLR, or do we want to maintain just a straight leg infantry regiment in the first island chain to provide the MEF commander some flexibility.
Wow. Okay. I want to get back to a question I should have asked earlier. What was the source of the confusion around MLR versus SIF, and that an MLR is the SIF, and where did that come from within the Marine Corps, and where have you both seen it as planners out, in 3MEF or operating with your joint force partners? What's the genesis of the confusion, do you think?
Well, Bill, I know Brian mentioned earlier that we rolled out several kind of conceptual documents in the 2019-2020 timeframe, a concept for EABO, the concept of stand-in forces. Those were both coming online at the same time that the MLR was coming online, and the Marine Corps did a full court press approach to the kind of the messaging campaign for that. And I think as all these new concepts and new formations kind of entered the Marine Corps lexicon, and the MLR became the face of some of these new emerging technologies and capabilities, I think it just became a natural thing for the average Marine to start conflating MLR with stand-in forces. Brian, anything to add to that?
No, that's a great summary, Bobby. So kind of turning back the clock, 2019 NDS turned into force design and the 38th Commandant's planning guidance and the tentative manual for EABO, which is all very experimental. And you saw the iteration happen quickly. You saw a second edition of the tentative manual for EABO come out. There's a lot of overlap, so a lot of confusion. And I think this kind of speaks to the power of Marine Corps messaging, and kudos to all the Stratcom and public affairs folks who helped get this message out. But I think across the force, the Marine Corps was very, very excited. It still is a very exciting time to be a Marine when you're experimenting with a shift that is this significant. But it led to perhaps some confusion, wherein Marines, yes, it was easy to conflate the MLR and the SIF, the MLR as the SIF. And we cite in the article, you can see as this develops from the documents as they evolved, because they did change from year to year, to various articles that many Marines were publishing in places like Proceedings, the Marine Corps Gazette, and others, culminating in, say, a Congressional Research Service report, a CRS, right? And those folks, they know exactly what they're doing. They're very good at what their job is, which is to develop documents to inform rapidly the staffs and the leaders, our elected leaders, so that they can get spun up on these issues very, very quickly. So you saw confusion between the MLR and the SIF and all those documents.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's certainly been, and I've told a lot of folks this, Marines are punching way above their weight at our pages in Proceedings. And as you point out, since 2019, with General Berger, leading with the Commandant's planning guidance, and then that tentative manual for EABO and the Force Design 2030, the original, there's just been a tremendous amount of iteration, experimentation. It sort of, from my perspective, throwing spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks, iterate on that. I think it's natural that you could confuse people, and that people could get, hey, there's a lot of different ideas and concepts being thrown around here, and rightly so, right? We're living in a very dynamic world where the adversary is moving rapidly. And so coming up with answers and responses and, tactics and procedures and doctrine to deal with that adversary, it takes a lot of iteration. It takes new ideas. It takes experimentation. There's just a lot going on. We're running close to the end of time here. I want to throw the last question out to both of you. I'll start with Bobby. Any saved rounds or parting shots, things that we didn't talk about that maybe we should?
I think if I was going to highlight one thing that we haven't really touched on, I think we've kind of danced around the topic, but as we continue to evolve our understanding of what the C2 for the MLR will look like, I think that there will probably be some controversies as time goes on about, perhaps the Navy doesn't want to relinquish certain authorities, the Marine Corps doesn't want to relinquish certain authorities over our capabilities. I think that if whatever approach we take, we have to approach a China conflict as a whole of joint force effort. It can't be a Marine Corps centric effort, a Navy centric effort, Air Force centric effort. It has to be joint. And the only way that we were going to win that fight and be successful is through joint interoperability. So we'll have to move past, I think, a lot of historic, cultural kind of service parochialisms to really make the stand-in force concept work out. Over to you, Brian, for anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. I'll just say this. The MLR is a remarkable formation. It provides some groundbreaking new capabilities that will be essential for commanders across echelon. And so long as it remains forward deployed, it's going to be one of the most critical enablers for giving teeth to the idea that the Marine Corps can be that JTAC of the Joint Force and say get target quality tracks to any shooter across the joint capabilities. And as it continues to evolve through that experimentation you discussed, we cannot commend enough those who have been at the forefront of doing the hard work to figure this stuff out. But if we conflate the MLR for the SIF, if we keep doing that, if we do not develop our understanding of the C2 and the authorities of the things that we put inside of the MLR to support the stand and force concept, what are we going to do? We will confuse commanders. We will confuse staffs. We will confuse policymakers and put them in positions to accept risk that they shouldn't, that we, as military professionals, as those staff officers, those action officers thinking through this, chewing on this, shouldn't put them in. So if we say, for example, that the MLR alone can do things that it cannot, we might be signing a check that we can't pay. Or if we don't know in advance who gets to take the shot, then we'll learn that in wartime at the cost of excess lives and failure. And then pick your historical metaphor, whether it's a Task Force Smith scenario from the opening days of the Korean War, or an Operation Eagle Claw and our failed bid to rescue hostages in Iran, or any other. That's the kind of disaster we could be signing up for, and we can avoid that today.
All right. Well, that's a great way to sign off. My guests today have been Lieutenant Colonel Brian Kerg and Lieutenant Colonel Bobby Fowler, U.S. Marine Corps. Their article with their co-author, Major Anthony Johnson, is titled "The MLR Does Not Equal the Stand-in Force." It's in the July issue. As I said, if you've got the print issue at home, it starts on pages 62 and 63. Brian and Bobby, thanks for writing for Proceedings and for being on the show today.
Thanks, Bill.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. This episode is brought to you by Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters